How is everybody doing? I just wanted to ask before, I forgot, but how many have been in any of our events before? I mean, we only had 2. Just curious. Okay, looks like well over 50% or so. Great. So we must be doing something right. So thank you for joining us, the panelists. Tim Williams unfortunately had to rush out. He was supposed to be on the panel as well. So thank you, Kevin, for stepping in. Thanking that. So I'll leave a lot of space at the end for everybody to ask questions. So please have your question ready. It's all about, as I said, collaborating and working together. I'll start with a very kind of big question, a generic question. I'd like to hear each one of you. You come from very different backgrounds and very different places. What's your vision for the smart city in Australia in particular in 2020? So 2020 is the year that is mentioned a lot because Cisco and McKinsey and many others talk about 50 billion devices by 2020. So it's really not far away. So my question has 2 parts. What do you think 2020 will look like? And what do you think 2040 will look like? So it's a tough one. Just for you, Kevin.
Oh, you talking about Sydney?
No, about Australia. So how the future city of Australia would look like in those 2, 2020, 2040?
Because unfortunately, I think Sydney's going to take a lot longer. If that's not controversial, I don't know what is. Look, I think that's 5 years away, 4 years away. The Minister for Transport, Andrew Constance, said that in 5 years, New South Wales is going to have driverless cars. It's kind of interesting. I'm not so sure. I think it's going to take a bit longer than that. Why? Not because of the technology, but because of all the other regulatory, legal, insurance issues that are going to come about. So, however, if you look at, let's get straight to 2040, I think ideally by 2040, think about a road system that doesn't have traffic lights.
I think the potential for the city to dramatically become more livable and workable and sustainable. At the end of the day, something like 80 or 90% of Australians live in cities. So this is really important to our prosperity, and growth. And I think it presents a wonderful opportunity to transform cities with IoT as a core driving component of it. Although I think that Kevin's probably right, it's going to take us a bit longer than those of us working in the industry would perhaps like and hope.
So think about a city that actually, doesn't actually have roads. I don't know if you've seen Arab's vision. It's pretty cool, actually. For me, I think that actually the revolution is happening because Australia is an extremely attractive place to live. The benefit of that is that we are getting the best brains wanting to come and live in Australia. I am just in awe of the young people that are coming from Europe, Brazil, America. And what that is doing is that is actually opening our eyes as to how other cities function. So for me, I think it's really exciting. And in 4 years' time, we will be talking about the innovation boom as actually looking at a bottom line GDP uplift because it's in the conversation. And I think by 2040, we will be one of the innovation powerhouses in the world. So I'm being very brave.
Yep.
It's wonderfully upbeat. I'm from the government, so I can help with that. No, look, I think there's some very exciting things will happen in the next few years. I see cities and the countryside becoming much more a contiguous landscape. So I think we'll be talking about 4 dimensions, being able to walk through time and space, being able to do that virtually, and being able to better understand how those things integrate, be that transport, be that food, be that the air we breathe or the water that we drink, the type of land use that we use, and the separation of tenure, identity, and value, which are very important things in government and will change dramatically through IoT. By 2040, I don't think the world will look anything like it looks now. I think in 2040, we will have entered a space in which I can only imagine all of those things beginning to focus on the algorithms around the outcomes we want to achieve rather than the things themselves. And at the moment we obsess about how to make something happen. We'll be obsessing about the algorithm to predict what's going to happen. And I think that'll be 2040. I hope so. I hope I'm still here in 2040.
I've got two of these. So I guess by 2040, we really should be asking the people who are currently 12 to 15 years old. I mean, so they're digital natives and they're growing up with some of this stuff that we're thinking from our own frame of reference and trying to extrapolate the future, but the next generation looking at things differently already. So I don't know that we could try and guess, but I think we should be asking them, where they think things are going. We should be helping them do that.
Sure. So I have a bunch of more questions, but I actually wanted to start and shift my mind because I think it's very interesting for people to understand, Jono, what DPI is, so what the Department of Primary History is and does. We met a few months ago, and I was amazed to hear from you the scope, the breadth, the budget. So I think if you give a few words about what you actually do in DPI.
You're probably wondering why I'm here for smart cities. That's agriculture's the next one, but actually we do a whole lot more than that. So we look after agriculture, yes, but also biosecurity, food safety, water, Crown land. We also look after international relations. We also look after fisheries. So if you eat it, use it, or it moves, we're interested in it. And I think that's what makes it so interesting for us. We talk about the concept of 4D for me. In other words, the ability for every cubic metre of this state to be able to be understood in 4 dimensions, but then interpreted for me. So that personalisation of that experience, I want to know what's going to happen with this or with that. So we turn over about $1.5 billion a year. We get about $500 million of that from the government. The rest we do through research or through research and through partnerships and through commercialisations. We have around 900 scientists that work for us, so we are a highly scientific organisation, the largest in the state. CSIRO is obviously the big organisation in Australia, but we're a very large organisation, and we work right across those things. We put RFIDs in fish, we put them in sharks, we put them in stalks of wheat, we put them in water, we put them in soil, we put them into weather patterns. And that's the sort of visions that we're now starting to really push hard. We've been working with internal incubators. We've been working obviously with Cisco in the Internet of Things, so quite different from what you may think. We're very much about science and driving a vision of an integrated landscape. And I guess the last thing is to say, we're only interested in the economic drivers. Now that doesn't mean that we're an environmentally destructive organisation, but our driver is to make sure that this state and all of the resources in it are driven to get a better economy, and that means being sustainable. IoT is all over every part of what I've talked about, from the food you eat, the labelling, the containers, the soil, the dirt, the remote sensing. I think it's going to bring it to life. I could get more excited, but I'll stop.
That was great, John. Thanks a lot. And from the same line, I want to ask Kevin. So obviously Cisco is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, driver of IoT in general in the world. Involved in many different aspects of it. What's the view of Cisco of smart cities, and what specifically Cisco does in other parts of the world to advance that space?
Okay, before I do, Jono, block your ears, but if we had more guys like Jono in every single state, this country would be in a different place. And I mean that. Getting the message across to government, if any of you've tried, is not easy. And this government, especially DPI, really got it, and they're getting it, and you can hear that. So, thank you, Jono. So Cisco's view, if everybody's into digital transformation, and it's the new black, but if you drop it down, really what it's about is about measurement. So we've been in fact, we've canned the term Internet of Everything, but I like the acronym, so I've turned it into the instrumentation of everything. And the reason for that is because the reason we're instrumenting everything is because our brains are basically plateaued out in terms of what we need to do going forward. So computers and what we can do with machines and machine learning, as you've heard from Peter earlier, is diverging from what a human brain can do. But that machine needs data, and that's why we need to instrument everything. And so our mission in life is to instrument the world. Obviously, one of the most obvious places is a smart city. And we've been doing this for nearly 10 years now, starting off with Songdo in Korea, and then many other cities and campuses and precincts around the world. What I'm finding in Australia, interestingly enough, is that there are a lot of smart university campuses that are, if you think about it, a microcosm of a city that are very keen to enable the campus. And so we think that's an important nexus or seed for smart cities. And we're seeing that not just in Australia, but in other parts of the world. So bottom line, we want to instrument everything in particular cities so that we can measure it, so that machines can not only give humans the better visibility with what's going on in the city, but start, as we talked about, both predicting the future as well as automating the things that are currently manual, clunky, and siloed.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So follow up from the first question I had, how are we going to see the future city? What is currently the biggest roadblocks? What's really holding us back? If there was one thing that we could kind of push aside, what would that be, you think?
I think that standards and interoperability are absolutely critical to the success and growth of this. And Catherine put a slide up in her presentation about, I think it was around about a 30% increase as a result of it. I mean, because if you think about it, IoT is an ecosystem. There's no one single player who has all of the answers. It's really important that all of these technologies are able to play nicely together from an interoperable point of view, and also from the buy side. So cities who are making investments in this space, you hear a lot of noise about this currently with cities in Europe. They're all very concerned about vendor lock-in. And if you can actually put aside the vendor lock-in concern and have standards and interoperability that ensure that all of these technologies play nicely together, then it removes that fear and unlocks opportunity.
I'd like to build on that, Piers. That's excellent. It's not just vendor lock-in, it's also the business model. So when I look at the evolution of cities over many years being in this space, Uberization is really transformed what we're doing here. And so the biggest blocker from my perspective is actually mindset. I don't think we need permission, and this is the thing that I am really trying to get home to people when I go out, because I actually do spend a lot of time in communities. I spend a lot of time, I've been in the back box, only a couple of months ago I was down in Bunbury, and I listen to what people are trying to do down there, because 25% of Australians actually live in the regional areas. So mindset, we don't need permission to do this, we just got to get on with it, and I am really strongly focused on a bottom-up approach. Don't get me wrong, it's really important that government and vendors and everybody play nicely together, because government's really important. And people look to government for guidance and just for verification that we're all kind of singing on the same hymn book, so that's nice. So for me, I think, the world's open. So if we have an open mind, security standards, it will play itself out. So that's my view.
Still thinking. Okay. I'll have another go. Look, I think it's all about constraint is one of the big things. In other words, in any revolution or evolution, you've got a problem that the systems, and I'm talking about capital and structures, are often set up around particular parameters. And when IoT and things, and Uber's a good example, yes, it's great, you can get individual things that challenge, and I'm all for revolution, by the way, get on with it, don't wait. You'll be in a subcommittee before you know it if you wait for the government to do it. So get on with it and drive it. But bear in mind that so long as, for example, there are 400,000 government employees, which is nearly 15% of the employees in this state, do not work in a mobile environment, do not work in an app environment, let alone an IoT environment, that's an enormous amount. That's $58 million worth of investment a year that is being, if you like, put into the status quo, as an example. You put that across our society, there's significant amounts of money which I would argue, until there is a constraint, in England that was called the GFC, for example, you don't get the innovation that you need and capital going to where it needs to go. And that's the same with insurance, That's the same with the cheapness of capital and access to capital. So IoT will disrupt, but heavy investment in the status quo doesn't contain the expenditure, which doesn't free that capital up to go to, if you like, the obvious place. So I would like to see that kind of disruption occur to things like capital markets and what have you, and start to flow it towards the innovation and away from the status quo.
So I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. I don't necessarily agree with some of the other comments. I don't think it's standards, I don't think it's technology. In fact, I'm going to quote from McKinsey. McKinsey has done a survey around the world. The two key characteristics of successful businesses and government that show leadership are, number one, the leadership of that organisation. If the leadership doesn't get it, then you've got a struggle because you need transformation. I mean, if you instrument a city, we can instrument a city tomorrow. The problem is you've got to restructure how you run the city. That's the people, the actual physical organisation of the city. That takes leadership. So leadership is an absolutely critical ingredient. The second one is the understanding that IT is not about the way it was in the last 3 or 4 decades. In other words, it's not about desktops and computers. It's about taking information technology to operations, instrumenting a bridge, instrumenting a road system. How do you do that, and why do you do that? Well, we're doing it because we're trying to measure. So it's those two things, and this is just quoting straight out of McKinsey. Leadership, got to get it and got to understand why we're going through a massive inflection point. And secondly, leveraging technology in operations rather than just under the CIO.
Yeah, so I guess building on that around leadership, so with the Harbour Bridge, it's a good example. The CEO is very supportive, but really the leadership in this particular case to get this thing started was the asset manager. So he took a bit of a risk doing this.
Sorry, Peter, I don't think everybody knows what the project is, and actually my next question was to ask exactly about that. So just explain a bit what it means, what the project is.
The Harbour Bridge project. So earlier I talked about instrumentation on the Harbour Bridge. So Roads and Maritime Services, who operate the bridge, have been around for a very long time. It's a mature organisation, let's say. The bridge has been around for a long time and there's current practices. The leadership in this case came from the asset manager, who was aware of the possibility of these sorts of technologies and was willing to take a bit of a risk. The way he managed the risk was he engaged us with a small research project to try and reduce the risk, mitigate the risk, and then he moved from one small project to a slightly larger project, and so it went on. Along the way, he lobbied within the organisation and got support at the top levels, but that's what we needed to get started. So in each organisation, there are potentially people like this who are champions, and what we really should be doing is trying to help those particular people go further and then instill that message elsewhere.
So I have a few more questions, but I want to open it to the audience at this point. So any question from the audience? Yes. No, it's not wireless, so maybe just stand up and maybe, yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Patrick Fair from Baker McKenzie. I wanted to leverage off something Jonathan has said, which is, it seemed to be in the presentations, beginning of the seminar, there were lots of aspirational things about connectivity and the benefits of control and measurement. But what are the business cases for implementing change in cities that really demonstrate that you should make a change and implement an IoT solution now? I wonder what each of the panel thinks is just the obvious winning business case.
Okay, well, again, the bridge, I mean, there's a very clear business case around extending the life of that asset. I mean, you can translate that to dollars. If we can extend the life of the asset by even a couple of years, you defer capital upgrade expenditure. So there's a very clear business case there. If you look at traffic congestion, there's measurements around the impact of traffic congestion on GDP. So if we can demonstrate that we can improve congestion, for example, then there's a business case. And there's many other examples. The urban heat island effect is another one. So we all know that the cities are a bit warmer than around the cities. There's research to show impact on health healthcare costs and mortality in cities. So there's a number of business cases that can be formulated around each of these areas.
Yeah, probably an example is digital licensing. New South Wales government's pushed under the Premier to put digital licensing in. It actually covers permits and a whole lot of things, and my department's going to be the first with a recreational fishing licence. And we've got 570,000 of those, to put in perspective. And what this is really about is by 2019, 70% of all transactions, if you choose, and I want to emphasise that, this isn't about policing and tracking, because let's be frank, that can happen anyway if you're a criminal. This is about people voluntarily getting a digital identity through Service New South Wales and choosing to link that to activity. Now at the moment, as I say, there are somewhere in the region of 760 permits or licences in New South Wales, and yet permits and licensing are the worst form of policy being put into regulation, because what it says is we agree that a policy needs to be here to make us do something, but the first thing I'm going to do is stop you doing it until you prove to me that you can do it, and then I'll let you do it, and then I'll come back to monitor you doing it. It's very clumsy. I think the Internet of Things, combined with that voluntary digital identity, now I know who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, and now I combine it with some of the technologies that we're talking about. So now you voluntarily let me know how I'm moving and what I hope to do. Why wouldn't I let you just open a cafe? Why wouldn't I let you just run your business? Because I can now start to build algorithms and automation that says, yes, I trust you to do those things, please get on with it. So I think that's a very real example. People just see the license, but you're actually solving a whole lot of problems. Privacy, obviously facial recognition eventually when you go to driver's licence, which is about 18 months away if the government is successful. So I think that's a big way that cities become more livable, because people choose to opt in and government enables that to happen, and it will change how policy works right across the city.
So it's a really good question, and because nobody can really answer it, we sort of spin wheels. But I'm going to give you what I think is some really big use cases, some really teeny little baby ones, and then what I think we really need to think about. The big one is transport, because you take a city like Sydney, it's getting worse. What do? Whatever you think of doing in the physical sense, it has major disruption and huge costs, right? Whereas if we instrument roads, and by the way, transport departments don't have money. So that's a real big issue, right? Now it can be solved through user-based tolling, which has got political issues. So if there's one thing that could really make a big business case in a city, it would be to instrument the roads and have user-based tolling, which could also help with congestion management. That's a pretty complicated mouthful, right? So that's a big one, but it's going to take some time. The bottom end, there's easy stuff that we've been doing around the world, like garbage collection and a bit of Wi-Fi in the city and so on. In some cases, there's a business case, and in others, there isn't. But I'll tell you what I think is the most important is the one in the middle. And that is for cities not to think that they've got to be the monopoly of all the ideas around what's got to change in the city. The city, like a government, has got to really provide the platform. So if you build a platform and then you create an environment like this, like we're seeing today, where little businesses, big businesses, universities can innovate on this platform and drop it into the city platform, that's when I think we're going to start humming. But it does take a bit to really work out what does that city platform need to look like. But if there was a digital city platform, and we're starting by things like sharing data, government data, but I'm talking about the infrastructure as well. If we had that, and we are starting to see that in Adelaide, we're starting to see it in a couple of smaller areas in Australia, I think it will foster innovation that commercial reality will spin out, because you won't write the app if you're going to not make some money out of it. So if you're going to write the app and make some money out of it, means that there's a demand for it, means you're solving a problem. So I think the thing that we really got to push for in cities is platforms, digital platforms, and let the city innovate, let the citizens innovate.
I come at it from a slightly different perspective, simply based on my experience as a consultant that operates in this area with some cities. One of the challenges that we find dealing with cities is where to start with them. And quite often you'll find that, you know, cities will raise a flag in the sand, say we want to become a smart city, and then they're suddenly bombarded by lots and lots of vendors and shiny pieces of technology, which all look really cool and really interesting, but it's really hard to work out where to actually begin. And oftentimes a starting point, again, from our own experience, is to actually understand what services is it that a city provides to the community. That should be the starting point. And you'd be amazed at how many cities don't have a catalogue of the services that they actually provide. So for example, you know, an estate 200 years ago gifted an oval to the city. Does that actually sit on the register? Who's responsible for it? Who's accountable for it? So oftentimes, a starting point for this is to understand the services that the city provides to the community. Once you understand those services, you can then start working through the various initiatives for each of those services and the associated business case, which might not always be monetary.
I'll just stick with this. So I'm going to pick up on 2 points. Services. The business case is the Airbnb and the Uber. And we're now seeing in Boston Uber for buses, for community buses, right? So there's the platform, and it's enabled, and that's the business case. And it may not necessarily come from the city, it will come from some innovative entrepreneur. I was at CeBIT last week, and you know, I loved the look of EV, which is apparently Australia's first solar-powered fleet-only hire car company. There's a business case. And what does that do? You know, it reduces our carbon, okay? You know, it potentially gets more people sharing cars because someone turns up in a Tesla and says, hey, I had a Tesla for the day, come on board. The second point is that don't underestimate the business case around food. So food agility and security. Now let's look at a major player such as Woolworths or a Coles. Business case for them, which is a city problem because their trucks can't load up into residential areas. They've only got a certain I think it's something like a 50-minute window of opportunity to load that truck in, get the food out to that supermarket and out again. So that's linked to a transport problem. And so their business case around smart cities is very much around, you know, just-in-time delivery, reduction of fuel, all of those pieces. And that innovation will come. So, for example, in the US, Kruger, are people familiar with Kruger? It's the largest, 2,700 stores. They went in with the JV with Zigbee, and they are reaping the rewards. They call it the Internet of Retail. So the business cases are going to come left field. They're not necessarily going to come from the city. They're going to come from innovations, and they're going to come from major players who are responsible for housing, feeding us, keeping us warm, and all those sorts of things.
Okay, good. Great. Actually, which remind me, I met a few weeks ago in a conference overseas, the general manager for early stage companies and incubators in Israel under the chief scientist office. So this lady, she basically managed all the portfolio of innovation and incubators in Israel. And she gave a talk and she said about, from government perspective, over 20, 30 years, they learned 2 things. First of all, they don't get involved. They don't operate anything. They set policy, but they don't operate anything in Israel. They let the innovators, the market, the companies do that. The second thing, they have a portfolio of many different programs and funding they provide. But there is one rule across all that portfolio of funding is that they only pay money directly to the innovators, to the companies. They can be startups, entrepreneurs, it can be Intel or Cisco, but you don't pay to anyone in between, not to the consultant, not to the middleman, not to any programs and such. So I thought that's interesting, those 2 principles that they run with in Israel. Any more questions from the audience? Hi, Jeff. Yeah. Just speak up.
Angel investor. I'm interested, it seems like a number of the enablers are in place, so hardware, networks, connectivity, but I wonder where is government's thinking on regulation, and how do we, in the Uberization of things, allow startups to slightly break the rules, community-led, and you know, what are the boundaries there? Are we sandboxing to allow innovation to flourish?
Great question. So I want to start with that. Want to start? Do you know government? Government? You start? Where government allows to break the rules?
Okay, well, I can't talk on behalf of the entire New South Wales government. That'd be a little bold. But I think Uber's a good example where they simply did take on the law by doing. So that's the first thing, is I think the lesson that governments are learning is that when a good service and a logical service appears, you can come up with archaic policy and rules and try to fight it, but actually the public's going to sit there and go, "Are you kidding me? Really? You've got to be joking." And it is in a democracy, to be fair, that carries weight. Things change, and so Uber did change. Now, has the government necessarily managed that well, or did it take too long to do it, or is it encouraging? Somebody else to comment. That sounds very political, not for a bureaucrat. But I think in our area, if I can share that, I mean, we've started running an internal incubator in the last 9 months to get ideas that are democratised from the floor. All 3,500 of our staff can log a story on anything at any time without it being checked by anybody in the department at all about anything they want, including photos, and align it with the corporate strategy. We've got over 500 of those stories in 9 months. We're starting to work much more publicly with our partners, where we put the technology out there first, or the data out there first, in a way that we never used to. You know, we'd wait until we had the story put into a nice academic journal. So I think things are changing because they have to. If I go to biosecurity, it takes us about 3 or 4 days to make an announcement that we might have a suspect that's going to kill people. It's on Twitter the moment we enter the farm. That's the reality of the modern world. So I think that democratisation of opportunity is real. I think governments are struggling with it. I think there's parts of government that get it and are doing it very, very well. I certainly wouldn't give up hope. I think the proof is to the contrary, that keep challenging, because government knows it's got to change, and the mechanisms are there to change. But it's very easy for you to change it. I have to stand in front of a committee in 2 years' time and explain why we made a decision. And that's the other side of democracy. It can be quite challenging. So
just a brief response to that. It sounds like via traction, by stealth, creates the community support for change. I'm wondering, is there benefit for government to perhaps create a contact point for innovators to test flexibility on regulations? There might be, say, around food security, about home meals or food delivery, and so on.
Let's create another government department, is that what you're saying?
Within government.
Okay, can I just say, look, I think that clearly it's about leadership again. You know, a leader who gets what's going to happen is going to make a change. That's the first point I'd make. And that's what happened here and in other more sort of forward-looking governments in the rest of the world. Having said that, I want to just argue totally against it. If you look at IoT right now, they say that, you know, especially in the home, half of all IoT things that are going to come into the home are going to be produced by companies that are less than 3 years old. Now you tell me, do you think those companies even know how to spell security? The answer is no, right? So we've got to also be careful, because it's ripe for a lot of kiddies to put these things in the house and then have access to your Wi-Fi, all your data, and off it goes. So on the other hand, so that's the other side of it. And in the middle, here's where I think, and Cisco's been a disruptor, you know, multiple ways. If you go into this thinking, I just want to make some money, you're probably going to lose. But if you think from a visionary perspective that you're going to make a constructive change that people agree with, then I think you will win in the long term. The question is if you've got the sustainability to get there. But, you know, if we sat back and said, you know, voice and data will never come together, or, you know, we can't change compute, or, you know, we wouldn't be a company, right? So I think the market has got to have that vision and execute on that vision and just keep bashing away. That's why Uber is where it is. I mean, they keep bashing away, right? And that's terrific. But you do need leadership, and you need also to watch the kiddie stuff that could open the world to a lot of bad stuff as well.
That's a policy of net public benefit test, really.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm proposing perhaps to government.
So the New South Wales government is going to announce an innovation policy. Big deal, you might say, but that's how government works. You create a policy, it comes out, it goes through Parliament, it's endorsed by the people's representative, it gives you guys something to work with, and frankly for us as bureaucrats, gives us something to work with. So that's working its way up through the process at the moment, and will come out later in the year when the politicians are ready. But so you're right, there do need to be structures, and individual departments need to take that up, and many are in different ways. The bridge story, the transport story, some of the other stories we're hearing, and certainly in my world of agriculture, water, land, very much so. But it's a good point. It's always challenging. You want democracy to be slow, okay? If you want direct action, there's other forms of government that give you direct action. Democracy is deliberately thoughtful and slow.
If we look specifically around IoT, I'm part of the IoT Alliance. I think there's many people here who are. And we are really overwhelmed with the openness and the engagement, particularly by organisations like ACMA, who really want to understand what is the Internet of Things, what are the implications of this. We're looking at it from a whole host of angles. We're looking at it from standards, from security, from the way in which this could be used. So I think the open dialogue is there. A lot of think tanks are all about talking. Well, I can tell you the IoT Alliance is not about talking. It's about, we're starting now to attract some really fantastic, peak business organisations as well. But my point is that government doesn't know unless you tell the story. So, we all have a responsibility in this room to tell the story and back it up with evidence so that if a good thing comes to light, then they can act on that. And that's the whole point of democracy, is to tell those stories. And I think that's a very exciting time supporting what John has said as well.
Other question from the audience? No? All right. Last but not least, I want just to touch about the security. We mentioned before, but the kitty and we had that session about the awareness for security and what is really what do you see the biggest opportunity actually with the security aspect and the biggest threat as relates to smart cities?
Well, imagine that you're a utility company and suddenly you're rolling out a whole load of, you're basically enabling houses through IoT to add additional connection points to your network or to your grid. And suddenly you've just manifested millions and millions of additional access points to that utility grid that previously you never had to think about before. And that's kind of what Kevin was talking about. And there need to be some very serious considerations around IoT and security as a result of that.
This is a really big deal. We had, a couple of weeks ago, Melissa Hathaway was out here. She is the advisor to the cybersecurity advisor to the Obama administration and the previous administration. And to give you some idea of how severe cyber is today, and it's only getting worse, by the way, she says that whatever your GDP is, take off 1 or 2 points due to cybercrime. That's how serious it is. And it's getting worse. Why it's getting worse is because there's 2 hubs mainly in the world, one in China, one in Russia, that are like, imagine Silicon Valley, which is constructive disruption, except this is in reverse around cybercrime. We monitor hundreds of thousands of networks around the world as a service, and it is scary what's going on. So as we start instrumenting outside of IT into OT, into traffic systems, cities, bridges, etc., the vulnerability is just amplified, enormously. The 3 key drivers today are number 1, IoT, instrumentation, number 2, cloud, number 3, mobility. You put those together, you've got a massive problem, and there's almost $1 trillion industry out to that makes money out of attacking, that particular, infrastructure. So if you don't think about cybersecurity, if you're a business anyway, if you don't think about cybersecurity with IoT, I'd suggest don't do IoT until you have. It's that serious.
Can I answer
Yeah,
the question?
please. Yes, of course. I was hoping to finish on a
So,
optimistic view.
This is a personal perspective. My 17-year-old daughter has decided that she's going to leave HSC because she's not interested in the courses that are taught in girls' schools these days. She wants to be a network engineer. So she's going to start her network engineering. And she met with the head of... no, seriously, I love it.
We want girls.
No, we do, and it's interesting. So here's the opportunity, right? We're in a time where we're trying to promote STEM. We've got a government who is looking seriously at innovation. We have the FinTech Hub. The opportunity is we are a really well-educated society at the large, and I think on a positive note, it would be fabulous if we can build those skills to build capability around cybersecurity and then export that to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I'm also optimistic. You know, once upon a time cities were dark, and so we invented electricity and police and they became safer. I see this security problem the same. Governments supply, at the end of the day, only three things. They ensure a way to identify humans, ensure a way to identify tenure, be that land or water or whatever it might be, and they form a currency or a form of exchange. They're the only three things they do. Everything else comes out of those things. IoT is going to automate a whole lot of those things, and that will present some risk. But if you don't have those three things, you have anarchy. And so governments and citizens, and I believe responsible governments, responsible citizens, will come up with solutions. Will criminals try to exploit them? Absolutely. Of course they will, same as they always have. But I sincerely believe that the answers lie in the technology just as much as the threat. And because it is such a threat to the very fabric of what we do, people emptying your bank account, people taking your personal data, stealing your identity, are so fundamental to what makes us who we are in a civilised society. I believe that we will solve those problems in the same way we've solved the other major things that are about us. So IoT is opportunity. It's got dangers, and Kevin's absolutely right. I think people underestimate the dangers. And I think this makes me sound like an old man, some of the kids who invent the exciting things that are going to happen certainly don't think about it. But we will solve it with the same technologies that, if you like, are causing the problem.
Thanks. I think the other thing we could do is look at education, not just for the 17-year-olds and the younger people, but also leaders in society. So, you know, company directors and people in charge of governance who think in terms of risk, but they really aren't that aware about some of the cybersecurity concerns, and they don't really know what to do with it. So there's a definite opportunity there to address education, both at the STEM level, in terms of people getting their hands dirty doing stuff, but also at the governance level.
And before we finish up, I wanted actually to ask a question of Simon from Alex Group. Because Simon, you see a lot of startups coming to you for help in developing their IoT hardware. How do you, from your point of view, what do you see from them? How do they deal with the security, with the protection, with the safety of the devices?
It's a good question. I'm worried that it won't finish on a positive note.
It's okay. wait.
Yeah, there are, and this is actually not just the startups. This is some of the multinationals we work with as well. There's two things I would say here. One is we see one of two attitudes from an organisation, whether it be a startup or a multinational, and that is one, cybersecurity is really important. We've got to get it right. It's not a surprise. The other attitude we see is bugger it, ship it. It's just A. Right? And before we built the IT cores, security was an additional cost. We're saying that it took extra work for us to do. And it'd be one of the first things that people would flick out and propose. Oh, don't worry about that. It's just a toothbrush. It's just an air conditioner. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as we push the boundaries at the device layer of cost, physical size, and power consumption, security is actually one of the things that gets pulled out. or at least it can get ported. Because if you just want to transmit a temperature, and then you want to encrypt that and you want to wrap some security, it actually adds to your power budget, it reduces your range, it has a whole lot of effects. So yeah, I mean, it's more, and often when you see some of these verticals, you go, well, yeah, it's not an issue there. But I think the issue can come when you don't know how someone connects certain things, right? The toothbrush plus the bin plus something else, plus some kind of means of, you know, you just don't know what these permutations are. So that's what we're saying. I'm not sure that answers your question, but at the grassroots level, we see that a lot.
All right, any last comment from the panel? All right, with that, I want to thank the panel for excellent discussion.